kicked this series off 2 weeks ago, I wanted to get back into Nehemiah. Last week we had our 5 for 5, and if you haven't had a look at that, then we're releasing those on YouTube as 5 individual clips. So super easy, bite-sized chunks. 5 for 5 was 5 of our own church family, each speaking for 5 minutes. Was a really good Sunday last week, and just encourage you to catch up with that. So we're getting back to this series on the Book of Nehemiah. And 2 weeks ago, we looked at 3 steps that we can take in our pursuit of purpose. We talked about letting our hearts be moved, letting our spirits be moved, and both of those things happening before we let our feet be moved. So before we actually step into action and pursue anything, making sure that our hearts are in the right place with it, that God has moved our hearts to pursue that purpose, that our spirit is connected with it, that we're connected and engaged in prayer, taking it to God and making sure that he's involved. We'll pick up on that again today as we hit chapter 2. I just want to start with this. If we let him, I absolutely believe that God can work out amazing plans and purposes in our lives that will bless us and bless others around us. If we let him into our lives, God can do just incredible things through us. He can change our lives, he can change our communities, and he can change our world. I've forgotten to start my timer. I'll start it now. We timed everyone last week. Go. Let's press go. Right, I'm going to pray and then we'll dive into it. Father God, thank you for giving us a word that, even though parts of it, well, so much of it is ancient in many ways, and yet it still speaks to us today. It is a living and active word that bears fruit and continues to bear fruit. It's done so much through history and continues to do so much today. So would you use it today? Speak through me, speak through your word, God, to bear fruit in us and through us, that we would be changed, that our community would be changed, that our world would be changed, because you do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're going to dive into Nehemiah chapter 2. Quick recap of the context. 587 BC, Jerusalem was destroyed. The Israelites were taken into captivity and they were exiled in Babylon. About 30 years later, Babylon was then conquered by King Cyrus of Persia, who subsequently allowed some of the Jews that had been taken into exile to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. 464 BC, there's a new king in power, King Artaxerxes, and he actually orders that the rebuilding of Jerusalem has to stop. And 20 years after that, we get to the book of Nehemiah, and Nehemiah hears news from his brother that Jerusalem basically lays in ruins. So some of the rebuilding has started, but the city of his people lays in ruins. And so Nehemiah spends something like 4 months in prayer, mourning, and fasting, just going before God, seeking God. And we find that during that time, God reveals to Nehemiah his plan, God's plan, that Nehemiah will be the one that God is going to use to do something absolutely incredible, to go and make a difference. So Nehemiah, this cupbearer, whose job it was to taste the wine to make sure it wasn't poisoned before the king got to drink wine, his job was literally to sip wine and serve wine. That was the heights of his job. He is chosen by God to go and make a real difference and rebuild a city. God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. So we're going to pick up the story in chapter 2, verse 1. We're not going to stick everything up on the screen because I'm going to skip through quite a lot of this. So if you have a Bible, feel free to follow. Otherwise, just trust me, I'm reading from a legit Bible. Nehemiah 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was bought for him, I took the wine. Nehemiah's writing first person. I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, which you wouldn't be. It was a really dangerous thing to appear sad in the presence of a king in those times. But obviously he is on this occasion. So the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." I was very much afraid. The king has noticed Nehemiah is sad. Again, not the done thing. But I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Good greeting, very standard greeting in those days, the right way to address the king. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? And the king said to me, what is it you want? And then I prayed to the God of heaven. I said, we're going to look at 5 things that will help you achieve your God-given purpose. The first one is this. Firstly, involve God. We looked last week at how Nehemiah spent 4 months mourning, fasting, and praying. Having done that, even then before coming to the king, he prays to God. He goes to God again. And here, when he's before the king, mid-conversation with the king, he prays. He's taking it to God, and this is a repeated theme in Nehemiah's story, that he keeps taking it to God in prayer. He keeps involving God. Before Nehemiah does anything, he prays. He involves God. And I want to suggest that we need to do the same, that we need to make sure that we continually and repeatedly bring the things that we are doing before God in prayer. Don't ever underestimate the power of prayer, and more importantly, don't underestimate the power of the God that you're praying to. Ephesians 3, I take no shame in quoting this time and time again. I've said many times it's my favorite verse in the Bible. Tells us that God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power at work within us. We're the ordinary ones. It's his power that makes things extraordinary. So the first thing we can do on the way to achieving our God-given purpose is to involve God. Let's keep reading. This is chapter 2, verse 5. I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah, to Jerusalem, where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. Second thing we can do to help us achieve a God-given purpose is to clearly define the vision. Craig Groeschel, who's the senior pastor of Life.Church down in the States, he's a well-respected speaker and podcaster on the subject of leadership, says for most people, it's not a lack of caring that's the problem, it's a lack of clarity. When it comes to leadership, it's not a lack of caring that's the problem, it's a lack of clarity. And I want to suggest that's what we see here in Nehemiah, is that he is able to articulate his vision, he is able to articulate his purpose clearly. Send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. One sentence, send me to Jerusalem so I can rebuild it. That's what I need to do. I need to go to Jerusalem to rebuild the city. There's no umming and ahhing, trying to figure out how to say it. This is what I think God might be saying. Nehemiah has spent time clearly defining what it is that he needs to do. Not a vague idea of what he'd like to achieve. It's a very specific statement as to the end goal that he's aiming for. I wonder what it is that God might have put on your heart. We talked about that last time, letting our hearts be moved by God. What is it that God has given you a passion for? Are you able to clearly articulate it? I want to suggest this morning that to do it, we need to define it. To be able to do it, we need to define it. And the practical application of that you can go away with today is to answer in one sentence, what is it that God is leading me to do? One sentence. Go to Jerusalem to rebuild the city. What is it in one sentence that God is calling you to do? It might be something like, lead my family to be totally debt-free by the end of 2023. It might be to have personal conversations about Jesus with 2 friends every month. It might be to establish a program within 2 years to help the homeless in South Surrey. I'm not suggesting these are the things, but I'm trying to give you the idea of how you can clearly define something in one sentence. For Sarah and I, it was move to the west coast of Canada to plant a life-giving church. You need to define it so that you can do it. And I want to be honest with you, Sarah and I stepped into that vision in pursuit of our purpose. And we stand in awe at what we see God doing as we see him building his church here. And I believe our community is going to be changed because a group of ordinary people like us give God our yes and see him do extraordinary things through us. So first thing we can do is involve God. The second thing is define the vision. Let's read the next few verses. Verse 6, then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take? When will you get back? And it pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so they'll provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. May I have a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the royal park, so he'll give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. Third thing I want to suggest that we can do to achieve our God-given purpose is make plans. Nehemiah here, we already know that he knows the priority of prayer. We know he is able to clearly define the vision and the call to go to Jerusalem to rebuild the city. But he also has plans. We need to make plans. He is able to give the king a timeline. Verse 6, I set a time. Verse 7, he asks for letters that he'll have safe conduct, safe passage. He knows that he needs things in place to provide him with protection. Verse 8, he wants a letter to the keeper of the royal park to get timber for very specific purposes. For the gates of the citadel, for the city wall, for the residence he'll occupy. He's got plans in place. He knows the things that he's going to need. Our plans don't have to be perfect. Sarah and I have discovered that most of our original plans for planting Numa.Church have not quite worked out because they've been scuppered by something called COVID. But we have been able to adjust and adapt because we had plans in place. We've been able to know this is the next step we need to take because we had plans in place. So we not only need a vision, but we need to know how to get there. When I was first called to ministry, I was in the final year of my undergrad, which was in management. And I knew that my next step towards ministry was that I needed some training in ministry. So I made some adjustments. I knew that I needed to get some theological training. I knew that I needed to transfer my classical musical skills into some contemporary musical ability. I knew that I needed to get more experience serving in the church. I needed more experience leading worship. All sorts of things that I knew I needed. And so I set about finding a way of achieving all of those things in order to get me in the direction. So we need to know what we need to do in order to do it. And then we need to have the plan in place to help us get there. And I just want to acknowledge a lot of this might feel very unspiritual. Right? Prayer, the first thing, involve God, perfectly spiritual. But now I'm just talking about defining a vision, making plans, and the next one isn't particularly spiritual either, or doesn't feel spiritual. But I want to say, again, that's one of the things I love about the Bible. It gives us the spiritual stuff, but it helps us to know the practical steps as well. God's given us so much advice for how to pursue the best for our lives. He's got a plan and a purpose for us, and he gives us the steps and things that we need to do to be able to pursue that and step into it. What are some of the next steps you need to take to move towards achieving your God-given purpose? Might be further training like it was for me. Might be getting some experience like it was for me. Might be finding a mentor, someone that is already in that particular area or field. It might be making certain life changes that are going to set you up better. It might be sitting down and writing out that plan, working out a budget, whatever it might be. There are practical steps that you might need to take. What is it that you need to do? And I just want to suggest here, this isn't about achieving your God-given purpose in the future. This is part of achieving your God-given purpose in the now. Is actually setting down and committing yourself to what God's asking you to do. We're going to jump forwards a few verses to verse 11. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I'd not told anyone what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem, and there were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. And by night, I went out through the valley gate towards the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on towards the fountain gate and the king's pool. There wasn't enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall, and finally I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The fourth thing that we need to do, or that we can do to help us achieve our purpose, is do your research. Nehemiah up to this point is working on the basis of things that he has heard secondhand, things that he has been told. He's now arrived in Jerusalem and he sets about doing his own research, finding things out for himself, examining the walls that have been broken, examining the gates that have been destroyed. I think the lesson here is simply to be informed. Right, when God calls you to do something, particularly if it's to address a problem of some sort, get informed. If you want to make a difference, do your research. We need to know what needs to be done before we can do it. And before planting Numa.Church in South Surrey, we'd arrived in Canada, we'd done a bunch of research about the West Coast, and then God gave us a specific location to plant in. And so we did our research on South Surrey and White Rock. And we worked out where the existing churches are, how many people in the area identify as Christian, how many of those are actually connected with churches, what issues people in our community are struggling with, where there's new population growth, how many people we would need, what teams we'd need, what equipment we'd need, where we could source it from, what it was going to cost, what different venues were available for us. We did a whole load of research to enable us to plant a church and to step into this vision. Again, a lot of that has changed because of COVID. But, as Johnny said last week in his 5 for 5, with God, nothing is wasted. And so a lot of that research we keep coming back to time and time again, going, what is it that we need to do this? What is it that's required here? Who are the people? What are the things that people are facing? So if you know God is calling you to something, what research do you need to do? What avenues do you need to explore? Where do you need to gather more information to make sure you know what needs to be done before you try and do it? So involve God, define your vision, make plans, do your research, and finally, step 5, or the 5th thing that you can do, is to inspire others to get involved. Verse 17 of chapter 2, then I said to them, still Nehemiah, still speaking in the first person, then I said to them, and I'll come back to who the them is, who they are. I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. And I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And they replied, let us start rebuilding. And so they began this good work. Nehemiah is taking his God-given purpose, and now he's casting vision to inspire others to get involved. Nehemiah knows he can't possibly accomplish the rebuilding of a city on his own. He hasn't rushed to tell everyone until he's ready. He's done his research in the dead of night. He's already sought favor and permission from kings and governors. He's already set about sourcing provisions. He's done all of that, but now he's casting vision to get other people involved, to get other people on board. And he casts the vision in a very specific way. First of all, he invites the people to see the problem. I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. And he's inviting them into that. You see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire. Then he invites them to be part of the solution. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. And finally, he gives them a picture of what leadership experts call a preferred future. And we will no longer be in disgrace. Right? Here's the problem. Come and be a part of the solution. And then we can get to this preferred future. We'll no longer be in disgrace. And this is so important for us. Sometimes I think we actually need to do this for ourselves, to speak a better future to ourselves and help ourselves to see and believe in a better future. But I want to say this. When you're pursuing your God-given purpose, the likelihood is that it's going to involve more than just you. And it's going to impact more than just you. Because God tends to use us, maybe as individuals, maybe together, but to impact others.